Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We're glad to have you. I am Geoff Freeman, President and CEO of Consumer Brands. For those of you that don't know, the Consumer Brands Association represents the totality of the CPG industry, an industry that represents 1 in 10 jobs in the United States. As an organization, we focus on the totality of the CPG business, everything from packaging to supply chain to how the individual products are regulated. And we do that by looking at things through the lens of the consumer. Our goal is to create a better future for CPG by bringing this industry together around common goals that create a stronger and more unified collective. If your company is working with us, thank you for that support and participation. We greatly appreciate it. If you're not working with us, we encourage you to take a look. Please send me a note at gfreeman@consumerbrandsassociation.org. Let's get to know each other. Let's better understand how we can work together. We'd appreciate that conversation. Today, I'd like to thank PwC for their support of the CPG Speak series, and especially today's session. We're joined today by Elizabeth Harris, Alison Lewis, and Geoff Tanner for a discussion moderated by Paul Leinwan, principal with strategy and PwC's strategy consulting business. Paul is a leading expert on growth, having researched how companies have been successful and publishing many articles and books on the topic. Elizabeth is Vice President Strategy for Constellation Brands in the Wine and Spirits Division. In this role, Elizabeth leads strategy development, building off her experience from previous roles, which focused on e-commerce, merchandising, and marketing analytics. Before joining Constellation in 2018, Elizabeth served as an engagement manager for Carney. Alison, as the Chief Growth Officer for Kimberly-Clark, is responsible for leading the global marketing team, building marketing capabilities, and leading teams focused on creating customer-inspired innovation. She previously served as the Chief Marketing Officer for Johnson & Johnson before joining Kimberly-Clark. Finally, Geoff is the Chief Commercial and Marketing Officer for the Smucker Company. He oversees teams dedicated to supporting the consumer and customer experience across the commercial funnel. Prior to taking on this role, Geoff led a transformation of how Smucker participates in its product categories and engages with consumers. He previously served in several leadership positions for Big Heart Pet Brands. With that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Geoff. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the next 45, 50 minutes talking about such an important issue in the industry. And Geoff, as we've often talked about with the Consumer Brands Association, this industry starts with that kind of word consumer. It's really important that we see everything that's going on right now. There's so much change. And so it's awesome we have this panel to sort of go through all those changes and what it means for companies and what we're doing. So let's dive right in. We're going to go through a set of different topics. We're going to start with the consumer and all the changes that we've seen in the last 9 months. And maybe Alison, if it's okay to start with you, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective as to what has changed. What are consumers doing differently? How are they behaving differently? I mean, you guys are obviously seeing it really directly with so much of all the purchase cycle and toilet paper and everything else, but love to get your views on that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and great to be here with everyone. Love talking about how we move towards tomorrow's consumer. When I think about the changes, I mean, I have to put out there that I didn't know when I joined Kimberly-Clark back in August of 2019 that I would be in one of the most exciting categories out there, that being toilet paper. So I would say that that's one thing that has definitely changed for all of us, the demand for paper products, the demand specifically for toilet paper, and the supply and demand challenges that were out there. But interestingly enough, and why I mention that, because there's more to it, is, you know, it really forced us to get under the psychology of why were people hoarding toilet paper. And, you know, this gets to what we should all be doing every single day with consumers, which is not accepting at face value, oh, they're hoarding toilet paper because they're scared that they're going to be locked down forever and they're going to run out. When you actually ask why, and got underneath it, it was actually driven by the fact that there was this inherent fear of feeling out of control with the pandemic. And for some reason, toilet paper and the ability to, I guess, take care of your bodily functions was something that gave them a sense of control. And so I tell you that only as a reminder to all of us that when we talk about the consumer of tomorrow, we have to truly get to the insights. We have to truly get to what's underneath the why of what you're seeing on the surface. And so the crisis brought on by COVID as it related to toilet paper out of stocks really reminded us all of what we need to do every day to be truly consumer first.
That's awesome. No, that's great. And I think it, as you say, kind of get us thinking around understanding what the consumer's really doing, what they're talking about and how they're behaving. Maybe I'll turn it over to Liz. I mean, you're seeing this from the perspective of beverage alcohol, a category that people who engage in it certainly are highly engaged. What have you seen in the last 9 months? Changes, differences?
Sure. So for us, I think the pantry load and the stock up wasn't surprising. What did surprise us was more of the flight to the familiar and a surge in brand loyalty. Our category really lends itself to discovery. And so we're not used to having the benefit of consumers consistently coming back for the same item. So we were pleasantly surprised on that front. I'm also surprised to report that consumption overall has actually remained flat. What did change is the pattern and occasions. So we saw an increase in days of week or occasions of consumption, and then a decline in the units per occasion. So ultimately, that really then resulted in premiumization and consumers being far more thoughtful around what they're ingesting and really elevating their everyday experience. And then probably less of a surprise to most would be the acceleration of how they were buying. So 3-tier e-commerce, all things digital. I think for our category, 65% of consumers who bought groceries online didn't also realize that they could buy alcohol online. So now that they are aware, we expect to see positive lasting effects of that. So that's kind of generally what we've seen in Bev-Alc to date.
That's really cool, and it speaks to this question people are asking: how much of this is going to change, versus maybe go back to some of the old beliefs and old behaviors. Geoff, I mean, food is so interesting, especially with what's happening with restaurants and where people are cooking. So, love to hear your views on this same question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think we all know what's changed now. I think the question is what's going to stick, right? Our perspective is that fundamentally the picture of the American household has changed. So in our categories, we compete in coffee, we compete in pet food. If you look at coffee, 1 million more coffee espresso machines were purchased since the pandemic. If you look at pet, 11 million more pets were brought home, and certainly we welcomed home 2 cute little kittens. Those changes are not temporary; they're permanent. And the other change would be the work at home flexibility. I mean, I'm sure most companies are not going to go back 100% to the way it was, and all those investments and everyone in the arms race to build up your internet, what have you, versus your neighbor. But these are permanent changes, and consumers are going to want to return on those investments. Their coffee machines, they're not going to rush back to the same extent to the cafes, and those pets aren't going anywhere, right? I mean, we saw a huge increase in treating as a result. So to answer the question, are we going back to normal? No. These are permanent investments that consumers have made and permanent changes in their lifestyle, and that is going to continue to change, their consumption habits.
No, that's great, and indeed, I think the behaviors that people are having just because there's so many hours in the home, right? And what does that mean in terms of how the family works and all of the chores around the house and what people need to buy to support that lifestyle. Maybe Geoff, just kind of coming back to you for a moment, engagement with consumers, right? Something that the industry has always wanted to do. I think there's been some great examples in the past, but now we find ourselves with not only the need to do it, but the opportunity to do it. Consumers are looking for that type of engagement. Love to hear from you. What are you thinking about in terms of that engagement model? How are we reaching out to consumers? What are you finding successful? Any lessons learned there?
Yeah, I'd say it's on a couple of fronts. So, I'm sure Alice and Liz will probably say the same thing, that we have seen consumers return to larger brands as a result of this crisis. I mean, just in our portfolio, we've seen 2.2 million more households into our business, right? So that represents a huge increase in trial, maybe new consumers and returning consumers. And so what we've done is we've made sure that we need to engage with them on two levels, right? We need to continue our mass marketing efforts, continue to deliver that message. And recent creative we've launched has certainly, we've tried to jump into the conversation. We aired a spot for Folgers that showed not having pants on in a Zoom call, right? But the other aspect of this is trying to retain those new consumers in the franchise. And so we worked with a big data company, Epsilon, in the case of our Folgers and our Geoff brands, to find those new consumers that have just come in post-COVID and then deliver them customized messaging to retain them in the franchise. So, both upper funnel as well as lower funnel initiatives in terms of how do we engage these consumers moving forward.
Yeah, Paul, I'll just jump in on that and build, because I love what Geoff said, and I'm sure Liz will have something to add to this too. But I think what was so interesting about COVID is again, I talked first about a reminder of the why, right? Get underneath the real why to get the insight. But it also reminded us that we have to be people-based marketers, and that we have to follow that consumer, that we have to understand, where those shifts are happening. And perhaps because, we've talked a lot over the last, 5 to 8 years about consumer journeys, right? We've talked about consumer journeys. We've talked about how you intercept people on that path to purchase and you get them the right message, right time. We've talked about all that. But what COVID did was sort of disrupt, everything so quickly that the changes that we would normally see happen at such small levels that, as marketers, as business people, we kind of get into our autopilot mode, right? So we don't have to shift that much. We can keep kind of going. Those little shifts and changes really don't shift your business dramatically overnight. With this, I mean, I think all of us saw the shift to online. All of a sudden, every marketer is reminded, oh my gosh, I have to follow my consumer. Do I really understand how this consumer journey has shifted? Do I really understand how to follow that consumer? Am I doing a good enough job of really understanding the changes of what their needs are and delivering sort of differentiating messages against those needs? So I think, I'm a big believer in never waste a good crisis. Now, I don't want COVID to come again. None of us want COVID to come again. But at the same time, the crisis forced some changes and some new behaviors in our own teams that were the behaviors we might have all been preaching and wanting the teams to reach towards. This accelerated it pretty dramatically. And because it was a crisis, it forced the change. So there's so many great things that have happened. And we talk a lot about what's the silver lining, but there are some real silver linings of what's happened on these shifts that are, to Geoff's point, never going back, or in the case of our, teams, never forget that this is how you have to work. This is how you have to market. So that is something that, we should all love about what's happened here.
That's great, Liz. I know you've talked before about this topic of engaging with consumers, particularly, around how there's been so much shift of where people are consuming. So yeah, I'd love to hear those stories as well.
Something that Alison just mentioned struck me. And, similarly, in our category, we have historically been disallowed from engaging directly with consumers. And as the regulatory environment relaxes and given, consumer demand to buy directly from brands that they love, we are really thinking differently around how to supercharge our digital transformation. And part of that is this customization, this micro targeting, gone are the days of relying on static clinical consumer cohorts. The message that I want, maybe Geoff wants to see a picture of a wine bottle with 2 cats on it, and maybe I want to see one with 2 dogs, and all of our infrastructure now needs to be able to deliver the same connected message, but 50 different versions and as quickly as possible. So we're thinking differently and shifting towards more of a high volume, low cost approach where we're able to quickly version. And I might show up in one cohort today, and perhaps, in 2 weeks time, I end up in a different cohort. So we're just thinking differently about how fluid consumers are, how fluid the macro climate is, and putting in some systematic abilities to be able to take action in that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All of this engagement and all of the new consumer behaviors that I think, as Geoff pointed out, these are here to stay. They provide opportunities in terms of providing, new products and services to consumers as well. And in some ways, the responsibility that the industry has to play that role of innovation and meeting needs where they are. Maybe back over to you, Alison, for some discussion about, what is the future of growth? Where's innovation heading as we look at this sort of new environment?
Yeah, well, I think, look, I think you guys have heard everyone say before, we had 6 years of change in 6 weeks. I mean, there's various, ways people have framed it up, but I would say the same on innovation in that, what you saw was, many of the trends that were happening just got accelerated. And, we talked a little bit about that, some of the channel shifts, but as it relates to innovation as well. So in the area, I'll use, hygiene and health as a great example, which is a space that, we play in. We saw that really accelerate. And, what we quickly said is, look, consumer behaviors are shifting. We have a moment, and what do we do in this moment? And so, we quickly moved, and in under 6 months, so with great agility, with the speed that we want to move with for innovation, we identified the opportunity of sort of proactive protection, anytime, anywhere, thinking about air, thinking about skin, thinking about hands, and really move to launch some things under the Kleenex brand that would provide that gentle but long-lasting protection, which is sort of a white space in the marketplace, but something that we saw that consumers were looking for. So this whole idea of moving into more Kleenex proactive care is a space we moved very quickly, launched within 6 months. And, I say that because, look, those were trends we saw. It took COVID for us to take fast action. In many ways, gosh, let's not let it take COVID the next time to take fast action, because we've seen these trends increasing. They just went, up vertical when all of a sudden this hit. So again, another great lesson of how we need to work, how we need to behave, how we need to treat the insights that we're seeing and understand when things are trending and when to take action. So the crisis has been good from that standpoint, but now let's keep doing it moving forward when we're through the crisis.
Hey, Paul, one build on that, because I completely agree with everything Alison said. What I believe is that there is a counter as a result of COVID to innovation, which is retailers, and certainly we are partnering with retailers to reduce assortment. So when the crisis hit, like for us, we joke about it, but we had to prioritize creamy peanut butter over crunchy. Okay, so, but every manufacturer was trying to figure out how to optimize supply chain, and every retailer was trying to figure out, how do I do this more efficiently with fewer store touches? Where I think, and we think this is going to head, is reduced assortments. And you've seen Target come out, and I think Brian Cornell was saying, up to 10% reduction in assortment, right? And look, you stand at any grocery store and ask yourself, do you need all those products on shelf? But I think one implication will be the bar for innovation will be raised. as a result of this, because these SKUs will have to turn at a much higher rate now. And even a 10% reduction in assortment is going to raise the bar significantly. I think this is a win for larger CPG companies, frankly, the ones that can justify shelf productivity. But I also think this will have an impact on innovation and will significantly raise the bar and probably reduce the tail.
Hey, Geoff, I wonder, just to build on that, I agree with you. And I mean, I think we all had to, we had to create 20% more capacity in
Right.
Mills that were already full. And so the way you did that was you cut the tail SKUs, and then you could get more capacity to help fulfill that demand that was out there. And it worked very, very well. And again, that's kind of the thing to say, well, we're never going back there. I hope that what it leads to on innovation is maybe there's a more of a two-tier way that we approach innovation. So if we can approach innovation more like the startups, right? Where maybe it's a test learn through, maybe it's just online where you can afford to have a long tail, but get it out in the marketplace, not use, artificial research tactics, but it might lead to this more speed and agility against innovation that's test and learn. And then you scale if you've got something really brilliant, but you kill everything that isn't so brilliant, that's just taking up, would have traditionally taken up space on the shelves. So I do think the innovation models will absolutely evolve, and that's exciting. I mean, it's really exciting because I think we all would rather innovate much more like a startup, much more fast cycle innovation, test, learn, scale fast, and kill a lot more things and fail proudly, so to speak, with those things that we kill.
I completely agree, Alison. I mean, the cost of innovation failure for us and for retailers is just too high. I mean, it's the one advantage tech has, right? They can just throw out these different versions and it doesn't cost much. As you know, for us, even small innovation launches are costly and complex. So I'm with you. This whole notion of a two-speed, and then fast scale would be a big step forward if we can get there.
So, one of the things you mentioned just a moment ago, Alison, is like things that were happening that got accelerated. And I can't think of a better example than sort of the move to increasing levels of e-commerce like we've never seen before. Liz, maybe I could ask you to comment. I think you made the point at the beginning that some people didn't even know you could buy alcoholic beverages online. What have you seen in terms of this switch? And also, how are you or the network sort of responding to it?
So the switch has been very exciting for us. I would say, digital channels are growing at least 3 times faster than the traditional market for us. And then certainly for the channels that we control, our gross margin is 50% higher. So there's a lot to like just from a financial health standpoint around this space. And we started early, so we bought a digitally native wine brand. We then overhauled our tech stack, and we've been working through some of the less glamorous elements around rewiring some of our processes to make sure that we're able to really build out omni-channel campaigns and programs. In the interim, we've been launching and having some fun with some social content. We had a Mayomi sponsored Pinot putt-off challenge where we had some professional golfers holding a wine glass in one hand and putting with another. And, this is all very new for us, just given our traditional, Chinese wall between us and the consumer. So, we're ready for it. There's a lot of work to do, still a lot of road to hoe, but, I think we're trying to do this in a way that's really sustainable. And importantly, I cannot emphasize the omni-channel piece of this enough, because I think historically the distributors have viewed direct-to-consumer and digital commerce as a competitor to themselves, and that's not how we're thinking about it. We're trying to do this in such a way where we drive better productivity metrics, the assortment is more informed, and we basically make everyone's lives easier that has to help supply and deliver the product itself. So we're certainly really excited. It's essentially our #1 focus at the moment.
Hey, Paul, Liz's point about omnichannel, I think, is so critical, because I think a lot of say, oh, it's a shift to e-commerce. I actually think it's like omnichannel is here to stay. I mean, that's what, this really taught us was, this combination of home delivery, click and collect, O to O. I think, if you listen to, Geoff, you mentioned Target, and if you listen to Walmart's earnings and you read all their annual reports, curbside orders are, up, I think something like 200-300% during the pandemic. 60% say they're going to keep their patterns, post pandemic. It's just the world we were always like, it was omnichannel. We talked about that, but this just put it into high gear. And, that creates, like, as Liz talked about, a whole new challenge for all of us, because we've got to be good at all types of the marketing and the selling and the supply chain. And that adds complexity to the businesses, which also links back to Geoff's point of how you might have to reduce the complexity in order to be able to do those really well. So anyway, I just want to jump on that point, because omnichannel.
Yeah, can I build on that, Alison? Because I think the greatest thing in e-commerce is the click and collect retailers and how quickly they have responded. Not that long ago, it really was a one game show, right? Amazon, and we compete in pets, so chewy.com. And it has been so impressive watching. I'd probably call out Walmart, Target, and Kroger in particular, but even the regional grocery stores, how fast they are catching up here. And I like that, because the thing about e-commerce, every business has a fundamental different profile around profitability. But for example, we're in the pet food business. Shipping large 40-pound bags of dog food around the country to your house is clearly profit challenged, right? In that sense, I'm excited that the click and collect retailers have really stepped up their game, right? So I think, and that has been radically driven by this crisis. And honestly, a more level playing field in e-commerce versus having one dominant player is, I think, a good thing for CPG manufacturers.
It's a fantastic point. And I think also, if you build sort of that trend along with the SKU rationalization, along with foot traffic, click and collect, you can imagine a very different version of retail, that will migrate to, and the implications that will have to a retailer's perspective of how they work with consumers and CPG companies. So I think there's a lot of change on the horizon, as well as in the supply chain. And I'd be curious, really, from any of you, to provide any perspective on the supply chain, because this is always, I think, the challenge that we sometimes hear. It's the 40-pound bag example, Geoff, you mentioned, but big packages of toilet paper. Liz, you've got a very complicated network that has to get engaged with us. So any examples or any advice around the supply side and how that's evolving to meet the sort of new omni-channel presence?
I'll jump in. I think Geoff's point is really insightful and smart. We almost weren't given a choice, over the last 5 years to optimize our bundles and our assortment by channel, because Geoff, to your point, you just miss out, right? Like, if you didn't get your 40-pound bag of pets food, like, you lost a sale, right? You lost a consumer. That's not a good thing. So you kind of, you optimize to the degree that you could to, make sure that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it wasn't ideal. Well, this is going to force the optimization around assortment. And then with that, I think the other piece that it forces is on the supply chain side, some of the things that we're doing, Paul, is really, how do you leverage technology to, you optimize your assortment, but then you maximize your execution through technology. And so if you think about the complexity that you start to bring in as you have all these, many more channels that are, you optimize the channels, but then you've got to maximize execution of the channels. That's when I think technology, machine learning, AI can come in. And those are some of the things that that we're doing, particularly in the e-commerce space, but it'll move into omni-channel as well, to really understand, when are we hitting a crisis point in terms of potential out of stock? How are we making sure that our content is up and all the pieces, the descriptions around the SKUs that are on there are right? I mean, executing in an e-commerce or even omni-channel world has a massive degree of complexity. And so you have to simplify the complex, and technology becomes really one of the critical enablers to simplify the complex. So that's one area, Paul, I would say that I think you'll just see continue to accelerate as we think about, where this world is going, and kind of the future that we're all talking about here, that we can kind of see. So it's exciting. I mean, it's really, it's just, again, the change that we've seen. I love change, and I love to see it move quickly and then, adapt to that quickly. And I think we're all doing that, and that's exciting.
I would also add that in order to do this at the speed required by the consumer, I envision that we will be heavily relying on a broader network of third-party partners, be it certainly 3PL and just logistics fulfillment, but also thinking through 3-tier e-commerce and on our own direct websites, having widgets and pointing consumers to Drizzly, to Instacart, to any local independent shops, et cetera. So there will be solutions available, but there will be that complexity and that administrative burden to make sure that you're executing the way that you need to, and that you have quality control in place to ensure your partners that are not really directly controlled by you are fulfilling the mission. So complexity aplenty, but I feel optimistic about the outcome, given that there are partners and third-party solutions already available to us.
Yeah, my only build, Paul, would be we've certainly, and I hit on it a little bit before, but we're using, Alison said, don't waste a good crisis, and we're not. If you ask any of the leadership team at Smucker what our number one focus is right now, it's reducing complexity. That, we just recently announced a divestiture of a very complex business. We're going through an exercise to reduce our own SKU rationalization, because what we've realized is there's no need for all these SKUs, right? And then I mentioned in partnership, we're doing it with our retail partners to reduce their assortment. So right through from how we operate our business day to day, what our portfolio looks like, and ultimately what shows up on shelf, a massive effort to just take out complexity, because that adds cost to the supply chain. It's the single biggest driver of cost.
That's a great point. We wouldn't be able to kind of talk about this whole channel shifting dynamic without raising the question of direct to consumer. And I think, Liz, you just mentioned it. I know this is topical. This conversation is certainly not new. It's been around for many years, but maybe, Geoff, I can come back to you and just get your views on the role that D2C is playing, both in terms of maybe providing another channel or just an engagement opportunity with consumers. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm going to guess that you might get different answers from us on this. I'm going to guess Liz is going to have a very different answer than I will, and Alison and I may be in a similar space. I'm not sure. Direct to consumer, and if that's defined as us shipping the product to consumer's house, it's not a priority, and I doubt it will be a priority. The bottom line here is it's just a profit challenge model for our business. And the other reality is that, I have purchased probably too much alcohol online directly, but I'm not going to go to the store and purchase, a jar of peanut butter. I mean, go to a .com site just for that purchase, right? I've got more interesting things to do. So I think direct to consumer, the role it plays will be very different for our business, which is sort of a large scale typical CPG company. It's not a priority. It's not where we make money, and it's not what the consumer is looking for. The only real use for us is a little bit of test and learn, as you mentioned, and a potential backstop if we need to ship let's say, we're not up on Amazon on a SKU for some reason, it's a good potential backstop, but that would be a temporary situation.
So I'll jump in. I think in a similar space to Geoff, but something that I'm still thinking about. And I'll be honest, I struggle with what is the role CPG direct to consumer when you don't have super premium products, right? So you're operating not at very flexible margins, and doubling or tripling the price of your product. That would have to be pretty special peanut butter or pretty special diaper. So look, I think the first thing I'll say is one of the things, again, through COVID that we realized is we didn't have buy now on our mobile and websites all over the world. And we needed to have that, not so much to buy from our own websites, but just when people were in crisis and they were looking for the solutions, we helped them navigate the solutions, and then we could quickly tell them who had them in stock and where to buy them. So it's an interface that takes you to Walmart.com or Target.com or Amazon. So that's one piece that I think that's just getting your fundamentals in place related to e-commerce. And I think we're all forced to do a little bit of, check and adjust there. The second thing I'll say about DTC is, I think, again, during the crisis, because we knew people were in need. I mean, we had products that people were really desperate. I can't find any, preemie diapers. I need them for my child. I can't find feminine care products. I can't find Depends. I mean, these were serious problems that people had, that they couldn't locate them. So, we put in some countries around the world, we actually quickly got direct to consumer up and running as a way to help solve and help people. Which has taught us some things, and we'll keep evaluating. And does that mean we continue with that, or was that just in the moment crisis because we're here to make people's lives better? It was the right thing to do. The third thing I'll say around direct to consumer is we do have, a few sort of what I'll call personalization direct to consumer. So Huggies Made by You is a terrific example where you can customize. It's a really, if you think about it, it's the gift for showers for babies. You can customize a diaper for that new baby as a gift giving. It's a way for us to get that diaper into the house first. It's a way for us to start our relationship with that consumer. So it's playing more of a consumer lifetime value in our recruitment role, but not so much, as Geoff says, that it's an ongoing sale of the diaper. I'm still thinking about it. What is the role? And I still don't have the solution, because I've studied a lot of these direct to consumer companies. I've met with a lot of these direct to consumer companies, and I still can't quite figure out what would be a winning model when it's exactly to Geoff's point. I mean, anyone can, most people in most parts of the world can get in a car and within 2 to 5 miles can drive to get my product, or can click on Amazon, or can click on Target, or can click on Walmart to get my product. So I think, again, it's going to be something we're going to continue to debate. And I think we all know that also many of these highly successful direct to consumer companies, they do cap out. And then what do? They go to bricks and mortar. Yeah. So that's where they're looking to really get their scale and really, drive their business to the place of, maybe what Geoff and I have, in store. So they're looking to be scale players like we are. And they're doing it through the older model that we've adopted. So anyway, I don't know if Liz has anything to add on that.
Yeah, I think our category probably lends itself more closely to a luxury model. And so there's something around the experience of how the product is procured that works better for Bev Elk than it would for both of you with respect to direct consumer. And then there's really a craving to have a relationship with the brand. And, just given the nature of our brands, there typically is a founder or an established winemaker that consumers want access to, or they want to feel that specialness, that they're kind of part of that that group. And they, when they're drinking the wine, they have a sense of, this person made it for me. This is what I'm supposed to experience. And certainly with all of the digital transformation work we're doing, we're thinking more broadly around content and what other services or experiences would go with that consumption moment. So I think just the differences in our category probably punctuate how each of us are thinking about direct to consumer in the near term.
That's great. It's a certainly very interesting topic, I think, as you all talk about, and I think companies are struggling with exactly how to manage it. So we'll look for more examples and more, sort of good practices here. I want to switch before we run out of time to a really important consumer-related point, and that's brand trust. I think the observation that many of you have made, others in the industry have made, is that, wow, consumers during the pandemic have really sought out these brands they know. And maybe, Geoff, going back to you, you've got a portfolio of really valuable brands. What have you seen in terms of that loyalty, that seeking out of the brand as it relates to the categories that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, Paul, and I mentioned some of the stats earlier. We have certainly seen a huge increase in consumers coming back to large, iconic brands. And I know that we're not alone. I'm guessing Alison and Liz have. I think there's a few reasons for that. One, during a crisis, when you're sort of knocked off, right, your axis a bit, you reach out for comfort. So that's certainly a driver. But look, millions of consumers lost their jobs, and they can't afford to take a chance on a product that may or may not deliver. And then I think another driver is that they're limiting their time in the store. Certainly, we've seen our basket size increase 11% since the crisis. And actually, it's interesting, launching innovation has therefore been a little bit more difficult because consumers aren't browsing in stores, right? They're like, get in and get out, right? And an 11% increase in basket size is significant. And so I think, when you're walking down an aisle, you see a brand, you know it, you trust it, you put it in your shopping cart, and you move on. And then I think the last driver, and this certainly we're seeing this in the data, is that, for years, the CPG industry has been a little bit besieged by these smaller startup brands, kind of nipping at our heels. They were very agile and very flexible because they outsourced a lot of their supply chain. Well, that's great when things are going well. Right now, having your own supply chain has meant the difference between being on the shelf and not being on the shelf, right? So I think that's been a drive. I think all of those factors are really contributing to what we're seeing, which is consumers returning to these larger, more iconic brands.
Great. Maybe that's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the responsibility that I think we all have always had to maintain this trust with consumers, but somehow over the last 9 months, not just because of COVID, the responsibility and the perspective consumers have about what is the company doing, what are brands doing to sort of maintain that trust, do the right thing. Maybe Alison, I could ask you to take this one. What have you seen in terms of that responsibility, and how are you responding to it?
Yeah, so I think, again, I mean, I love that, big brands are cool again, because I think we were all defending for quite a few years, that big brands weren't dead, and Geoff described why that is so true today. I think when we think about kind of the role of it all, I think from a company perspective, during the crisis, everyone was reminded that they want companies to be doing the right thing. And so many of our companies stepped up, whether it was to, I talked about direct to consumer, we wanted to make sure our products were available to people. I mean, that was just stepping up and saying, we owe this to the human beings of the world to make our products available, because they're products that people need every single day. The other thing I think that you saw was brands stepping up and leaning into their purpose. And, if we think about it, promise is a lot about, why people buy the product. And, Geoff and Liz have talked quite a bit about that. I think purpose is why they buy into the product, why they stick with the product. And I do think that so many of the big brands are all founder-led brands when they started. Liz, you even talked about some of your brands, I think are, not young brands, but people still want to know who that founder is and hear their point of view. We just have to go back to our roots on that and really remind people of the why. And, we did a lot of things with our brands through the pandemic that we're continuing, which we're reminding people of the why. So, Kotex as a brand, the stigma against periods, and, erasing that stigma is one of the reasons that Kotex exists. And we leaned heavily into that because it was a moment to remind people why they should buy in to our propositions, not just buy our promises. So it definitely was reputation. It definitely is a moment to continue to build that trust based on promise and purpose.
Yeah, Liz, maybe it would be great to hear from you on this. And I can also add just a question around purpose, because I think as Alison and everyone has described, I mean, the last 9 months has been a real moment of being reminded how important this industry is. And I think some companies have also stepped back and said, are we clear about our purpose to the world? Are we clear about who we are, what we're trying to accomplish? But if you have comments on either the brand trust point or on the broader topic of purpose, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are a publicly traded company, so we exist for profit, but we do, as employees and within leadership in the business, believe that it is still incumbent upon us to be a force for positive social change. So to us, it is very important to do that in a way that's authentic and meaningful, and congruent with who we are, what our brands are, who we serve, and how we go to market. And so some of the ways that has come to life for us are through our ventures portfolio. So we have 2 funds. We have the Focus on Female Founders, where we've committed $100 million to support early stage investments in female founded or female led businesses. And similarly, we've committed $100 million for Black and minority owned startups, which we just launched earlier this year. And we like to do this in a way that is part of our existing go-to-market, and just part of the fabric of the business. So we're already identifying what's next. We're looking to invest in young or early stage founders. Why not make it a point to do that with underserved groups in a way that we can catalyze for social benefit, but is still part of our company mission? So those are just a few examples of how we think about it. We don't typically market Constellation as at the corporate level. We really try to go to market brand by brand. So what we are still working through is how we take the fabric of each brand and then apply that and mobilize against it at the brand level. But in the interim, what we've done at the corporate level has really been more focused on specific groups and audiences, but baked into how we go to market at present.
That's great. I know, Geoff, you mentioned at one point sort of managing this difference between, what the brand has to do and what the corporation has to do. Love some advice for others about that, because I think that's something that pops up quite a bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, it is, I think, as Liz said, it's just essential for a company to be purpose-driven. Your consumers expect it, your employees expect it, your investors expect it increasingly. And, I'm proud of the actions we've taken on that front. Stop hate for profit was something that we jumped on pretty quickly. But I do think there is a distinction between the actions of a company and the actions of a brand. I think it's important for a company to be recognized for its efforts in this space, largely, again, because consumers, investors, customers, even employees, they expect it. But I don't think every brand should make purpose front and center. And I'll go as far as to say, I think too many brands are trying to do that. For some brands, purpose is deep in their DNA and they need to lead with it. And that's terrific. I mean, it's an old school example, but Newman's Own is an example, right? But consumers don't want to open their pantry and kind of see a United Nations of purpose just front and center, right? They want that brand to deliver what that brand stands for. But they want to know that it's made by a company that is doing the right thing. And I have seen too many brand teams in my career confuse that, put purpose out in the front, and then wonder why the advertising didn't do so well, right? So I think it really, there is a distinction between the company and the brands. The company needs to lean in and lean in hard. Whether or not the brand does it, I think that depends on the brand, what it stands for, what its promise is. And if it's purpose driven, lean in. If it's not, don't make it front and center.
That's awesome. Really appreciate that. We're just about out of time, but I know something everybody wanted to hear about was just any advice. I mean, we're about to wrap up 2020. We're moving into next year. We just had a whole discussion about consumers and innovation and growth and e-commerce. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to continue to do better. Maybe Alison, I'll start with you on this. Advice for everybody kind of listening in terms of how to actually manage this in the best possible way.
Yeah, well, you heard me, I think I mentioned it a couple of times, but my advice for 2020 and as we go beyond 2020 is, unfortunately, we all learn to never waste a good platform crisis, and that a burning platform can be a powerful accelerator to, do what maybe you knew you needed to do for quite some time, but you actually did it. And I think we don't want to lose that, because what we saw through the crisis was sort of the speed, the agility, the focus, the playing to win, the leadership, having, employees' backs, leaning into, company purpose, to Jeff's point, and doing the right thing as a company through this, by keeping employees safe, by helping in communities, by doing all this stuff. I mean, that's the stuff we don't ever want to lose. So my advice is, let's try to hold on to, the burning platform that we really should operate with every day, because no matter who we serve, there are people waiting for, our products that, make people's lives better in whatever form. No matter what industry you're in, you exist because you are actually helping people in some way. And let's keep doing that, because they're waiting for us.
Jeff?
I would say, declare war on complexity. Organizations, particularly ones the size of the three of us work for, they just over time become more complex by nature. I just think it's the nature of organizations. And what we've seen during COVID, in many respects, has been out of necessity, just this we got to get it done, and there's sort of forced prioritization. And you know what? We figured it out. And in some cases, we're operating better than we ever were. And so I would sort of sit down and I would say, how do we take complexity and then associated costs out of our organization? And that could be everything, talked about it at the portfolio level, how you make decisions, number of people in meetings. I mean, we're doing this at Smucker. It is an all-out war on complexity, because I think what we saw is when we really just focused on what was critical and we jettisoned everything else, we actually became better operators. And it's the one thing that large companies and CPG is kind of a poster child. They're just too slow, too lumbering, and too complex. So that would be my advice.
That's awesome.
I completely echo what both Jeff and Alison have said, and could not agree more. I would just think about it as progress over perfection. There has historically been, at least in CPG and Bev-Alc, this pressure to build the perfect mousetrap and to have completely bulletproof logic before you make even a seemingly innocuous decision. And the world's moving too fast. Consumers are changing too quickly. It's a fool's errand to try to do that. And so we need to take what we've learned and the muscles that we've developed through this crisis and make quick decisions, make informed choices. They won't all be correct, but we will always be moving in the right direction.
That's great. Alison, Jeff, Liz, thank you so much from me in terms of the really great dialogue. I know everybody appreciated it. I'm going to turn it back over to Geoff Freeman at this point.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the group. I love to close these things with 3 takeaways, but I'm not going to do 3 takeaways because I think there's one takeaway, one critical one, and that is that, you know, for all those, and we all have friends who can't wait to get back to normal, we're not going back to the way things were. And I think that is the essence of so much of what you guys said today. Everything is changing, and the expectations for our industry are going up. They're going up in the eyes of the consumer. Alice, I loved when you talked about how, hey, we put a buy now function on our own website. They couldn't buy it from us, but we were doing the work for them. We were taking them to where they needed to go to find it. Right? The expectations for us as an industry are only going up. And I think we've got to keep that in mind as we now head into a new administration in Washington, a newfound focus on plastics, a newfound focus on climate, a newfound focus on protecting the consumer. A lot of things that may not have had a conversation over the last 4 years are going to be front and center. And I think we're going to be tested to put our money where our mouth is on a lot of these issues in terms of how much we value the consumer, how much they are our North Star, and how committed we are to pursuing some of these things. I'm excited by it. I think it's going to be a fun challenge, so long as we know we're not going back to normal. There is a new environment, omnichannel and everything else. Let's embrace that. Let's have some fun with it. And as has been said multiple times, let's not waste a crisis here to take this industry forward. So thank you so much to the 3 of you, Paul, to everybody who joined us today. Great discussion. Thank you.